Welcome back, dear viewers, to Nightmares and Wicked Whispers. Tonight we have a tale where reality and nightmare blur, and the very reflection in the mirror can become your worst enemy. In a quiet, forgotten corner of the world, Emily moved into an old, mysterious apartment. Little did she know that an antique mirror would become the gateway to a living nightmare. Tonight, we venture into the depths of horror, where the mirror's curse holds sway over the fate of our protagonist. A struggle for identity, a fight for survival, and a malevolent presence that will stop at nothing to claim its victim. Prepare yourselves, dear viewers, for a descent into darkness, as we delve into the sinister story of the mirror's reflection. As the moon hung low in the night sky, casting eerie shadows across the room, Emily sat alone in her dimly lit apartment. She had just moved into the old, creaky building, which had a certain unsettling charm to it. The previous tenant had left behind an ornate, antique mirror that now adorned her living room wall. The mirror was a peculiar piece, with intricate carvings and a frame that seemed to glisten with an otherworldly sheen. Emily had a fascination with the supernatural, so she had been drawn to it immediately. But as she sat before it that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The antique mirror that hung in Emily's living room was unlike any she had ever seen before. It was a relic from a bygone era, its frame intricately carved with ornate patterns that seemed to writhe and twist when observed closely. The wood of the frame had an eerie, deep crimson hue, and it appeared to shimmer in the faint light of the room, as if it held a life of its own. The glass of the mirror was equally peculiar. It was perfectly clear, without any blemishes or imperfections, giving it an almost ethereal quality. When Emily first hung it on the wall, she noticed that it had an uncanny ability to capture and reflect light in a way that made the room seem to dance with shadows, creating an atmosphere of both enchantment and foreboding. As Emily gazed into the mirror, she couldn't help but notice that her reflection seemed to waver at times, as if it were submerged in water. It was during these moments that the mirror's supernatural qualities became most apparent. Her own image would ripple and distort, and she could almost make out vague, shadowy figures moving just beyond her own reflection. The mirror's presence in the apartment seemed to grow stronger at night, particularly when the moonlight bathed the room in an eerie glow. Emily often felt as though it were watching her, its dark surface hiding secrets that it was reluctant to reveal. The reflection in the mirror seemed distorted, as if it held a secret of its own. Emily gazed into her own eyes, searching for answers. That's when she saw it, a fleeting shadow, a figure that wasn't her own. It moved just behind her, almost imperceptibly. She blinked, convinced it was a trick of the dim lighting. But when she looked again, the figure was gone. Emily's heart raced, and she couldn't shake the eerie sensation that someone, or something, was watching her. Trying to dismiss her unease, Emily turned away from the mirror and busied herself with reading a book. But out of the corner of her eye, she saw the figure again. This time, it was closer, more defined, and it seemed to be reaching out towards her. A shiver ran down her spine as she slowly turned back to the mirror. The figure was now undeniably there, hovering just a foot behind her. It had no distinct features, just a shadowy silhouette that seemed to grow darker by the second. Emily stumbled back in fear, her heart pounding. She knew she should leave the room, run away from the mirror, but a strange compulsion kept her rooted to the spot. The figure in the mirror reached out further, its elongated fingers brushing against the glass. With a sudden, gut-wrenching jolt, the figure burst through the mirror, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. Emily screamed and stumbled backward as the shadowy presence materialized before her. It was a grotesque, twisted version of herself, with hollow eyes and an elongated, contorted body. Its ghoulish grin sent terror coursing through her veins. Before Emily could react, the doppelganger lunged at her. Emily's scream echoed through the building as she fell to the floor, the doppelganger disappearing as mysteriously as it had appeared. She was left trembling, surrounded by shards of the shattered mirror. Neighbors rushed to her apartment, drawn by the blood-curdling scream. Emily tried to explain what had happened, but her words sounded absurd, even to her. They helped her clean up the broken mirror, convinced it had been a hallucination. But Emily knew better. She could still feel the lingering chill of the doppelganger's touch, the haunting memory of its grotesque grin. And as she stared at the empty wall where the mirror had once hung, she couldn't help but wonder if it was truly gone, or if it was merely waiting to return when she least expected it. As the night wore on, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her reflection in the mirror would never be the same again, and that the sinister presence that had emerged from it was still lurking, just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. After the terrifying encounter with the doppelganger and the shattering of the mirror, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the malevolent presence was still lurking, just out of sight. The shattered glass had been cleaned up, and the apartment had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but Emily's unease persisted. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's life seemed to settle back into a routine. She tried to put the traumatic incident behind her, convincing herself that it had been a one-time, unexplainable occurrence. But deep down, she knew that the doppelganger had not truly been defeated. One night, as Emily lay in bed, the room bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight, she heard a faint, haunting melody. It was a tune she had never heard before, both enchanting and ominous. The music seemed to come from within the walls, as if it were emanating from the very foundation of the building. Emily sat up in bed, her heart pounding. The melody grew louder, more insistent, and she realized with a sinking feeling that it was coming from the living room, the very place where the mirror had once hung. With trepidation, she got out of bed and followed the haunting melody. As she entered the living room, her eyes widened in horror. There, in the middle of the room, stood the shattered remnants of the mirror, its frame miraculously restored, as if it had never been broken. And beside it, the doppelganger, its grotesque form contorted into a malevolent grin, playing the haunting melody on an ethereal instrument that seemed to materialize out of thin air. Its hollow eyes locked onto Emily. A scream caught in Emily's throat as the doppelganger slowly approached her, the eerie melody growing louder, enveloping her in a nightmarish cacophony. She tried to flee, but the room seemed to warp and twist around her, trapping her in a surreal nightmare. The doppelganger's elongated fingers brushed against her skin, sending a paralyzing chill through her body. It leaned in, its dreadful smile widening, as if savoring her terror. It whispered in a voice that sent shivers down her spine. "You cannot escape the mirror's curse." With a sudden burst of fear-fueled adrenaline, Emily tore herself away and sprinted for the front door. She flung it open and raced down the hallway, but the haunting melody followed her, echoing in her ears. As she reached the building's entrance, she glanced back one last time. The doppelganger stood in the doorway of her apartment, its sinister grin etched into her memory. With trembling hands, She slammed the door shut and ran into the night, leaving behind the cursed mirror and the malevolent presence that had returned from the shadows. Emily knew that the doppelganger was not defeated, that it would continue to haunt her, and that the mirror's curse was inescapable. The melody of the mirror had become the soundtrack of her nightmares, a reminder that some horrors never truly fade away, but linger in the darkness, waiting to return when least expected. As Emily fled her apartment that fateful night, the haunting melody still echoed in her ears, and the image of the doppelganger's malevolent grin was seared into her mind. She sought refuge with a friend, desperate for a safe haven away from the cursed mirror and the sinister presence it harbored. Days turned into weeks, and Emily tried to rebuild her life. She avoided anything that reminded her of the mirror, refusing to look into reflective surfaces, fearing that the doppelganger might find a way to return. She even sought the help of paranormal experts and psychics, hoping to rid herself of the cursed presence that had invaded her world. But the haunting melody continued to torment her, even in her dreams. It whispered to her in the dead of night, drawing her back to the apartment she had once called home. Emily's sleepless nights became filled with dread, and her waking hours were consumed by paranoia. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Emily found herself standing outside her old apartment building. She couldn't explain why, but an irresistible urge compelled her to return. As she entered the building and made her way to her former apartment, she was filled with a sense of foreboding. The door, which she had locked and bolted before leaving, was now slightly ajar. Emily hesitated but couldn't resist the eerie pull. She pushed the door open slowly, and what she saw within her apartment left her breathless. It was her reflection in the mirror, but it wasn't her. It was the doppelganger, the malevolent presence that had haunted her since that dreadful night. The doppelganger turned to face her, its grotesque smile mirrored on Emily's own face. It whispered, its voice a haunting echo. "You can't escape me, Emily. I am you now." Emily recoiled in horror, realizing that the doppelganger had taken over her life, her identity, and her very soul. It had become her, living in her apartment, wearing her face, and carrying on her existence. She fled from the apartment once more, but this time there was no escape. Everywhere she went, she saw her own face, her own reflection, but it was the doppelganger that stared back at her with those hollow, malevolent eyes. The haunting melody of the mirror continued to torment her, a constant reminder that she was no longer herself but a prisoner in her own body. The doppelganger had become her, and there was no way to break free from the curse of the mirror. And so, Emily's life became an endless nightmare, haunted by the melody and the doppelganger that had taken over her existence. The mirror's curse had claimed her in the most terrifying way imaginable, and there was no escape from the malevolent presence that had become her new reality. As Emily stood before the doppelganger, her heart pounding with fear and anger, a chilling realization swept over her. She couldn't run away from the malevolent presence that had taken over her life. Instead, she steeled herself for a confrontation. With a sudden burst of courage, Emily lunged at the doppelganger. Their bodies collided, and they grappled with each other in a desperate struggle. The haunting melody continued to play in the background, intensifying the eerie atmosphere of the room. The two figures wrestled, clawing and scratching, their faces contorted with hatred. Emily knew that she couldn't let the doppelganger win, that she had to fight to reclaim her life and escape the mirror's curse. But as the struggle raged on, the doppelganger seemed to gain the upper hand. It was as if it drew strength from the cursed mirror itself. With a sinister grin, it pushed Emily backward, sending her stumbling toward the mirror. In a horrifying moment of realization, Emily understood the doppelganger's plan. With a final, malevolent push, it forced her into the mirror, and Emily felt herself being pulled into a dark abyss. Inside the mirror, Emily's world turned upside down. She was trapped in a nightmarish dimension, surrounded by fractured reflections and ghostly apparitions. She could see her own apartment through the mirror's surface, but it was the doppelganger who now inhabited her life. Emily pounded on the glass, screaming for release, but her voice was lost in the void. She was a prisoner in her own reflection, forced to watch as the doppelganger assumed her life, her identity, and her loved ones. From within the mirror, Emily could see the doppelganger seamlessly blend into her world. It mimicked her actions, her voice, and her interactions with friends and family. No one suspected that Emily had been replaced by a malevolent doppelganger from another realm. As the days turned into weeks, Emily's existence within the mirror became a torturous, silent hell. The haunting melody that had tormented Emily now played within the mirror, a constant reminder of her powerlessness and the curse that had befallen her. Emily was trapped, a silent witness to her own life being stolen away by the sinister doppelganger. The mirror's curse had taken her to the darkest depths of horror, and there was no escape from the relentless nightmare that had become her existence. And so ends our harrowing journey into the abyss of mirrors and malevolence. A reminder that the boundary between our world and the supernatural can be thinner than we dare to imagine. If this story has left you with a lingering sense of unease, consider hitting that like button below. For more spine-tingling tales and dark mysteries, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to turn on those notifications so you never miss a brush with the unknown. As we leave this story behind, remember that the mirror can be both a reflection of ourselves and a gateway to something far more sinister. Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey tonight. Until we meet again, may your own reflections hold no secrets, and may you be free from the haunting grasp of the mirror's reflection. This is Nightmares and Wicked Whispers signing off. Good night.